so sick. I'm so sick of American politicians. They want to spit on the Constitution. They want to make these stupid claims like, how can I go back to my voters and tell them I voted against God? Well, 60% of your voters don't even believe in God. The only reason that you don't ever hear from them is because the 40% of your voters that do believe in some God are keeping all of the votes secret because they want to manipulate the results of the vote into forcing everyone to live by their opinion. And they want to claim they're forgiven for doing so. As a politician, as a political figurehead in modern America, America was never supposed to be, the business of America was never supposed to be what it is today, where everything is literally dictated by private business. Okay, so if the company, whatever social media platform you prefer, whatever their political views are, they're going to bury all other ideas. So if there's a vote coming up on something that could affect YouTube's standard in the way that they want to run their business, they're shutting down that vote. They are not going to let the people using their platform have any idea that this vote is coming up. All right. Now, you go to your local newspaper as a state government, you go to each county and you talk to, because almost every county has its own little local newspaper press. I mean, a lot of them are dying, and so all the more reason to do the right thing for once in your life. You call up the local Gazette, the local Times Herald, whatever, the Citizen, whatever they've named their newspaper. You call them up and you say, well, we need 100,000 copies of a specialist paper to be delivered, one to each household, and we'll cover your costs plus a minimal amount of profit because we are the government and we're, funded by tax dollars, so we can't really afford to just blow everybody's money, but we need everybody to know that this vote is coming up, right? So not only are you bolstering your local economies in your local county, in your counties, in your state, whatever, right? Now I understand that going to a larger media outlet like say the New York Times, right? New York Times is not necessarily going to print everything. They're going to try and limit whatever they can, especially if whoever's in charge happens to have a one-sided or other-sided political view. They're going to do the same thing. They're going to try and manipulate the information in their newspaper so people don't know what they don't want people to know. And this is why people no longer trust the American media, because it doesn't matter if it's Fox, CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS. It doesn't matter. Every article, every piece of news you are presented with is handpicked and groomed for the specific image of that company. Right? It is what it is. You can look at each one of them and if you know anything, you know that pretty much Fox is going to be telling you everything from the right-wing conservative perspective, and they're going to ignore all left-wing news. There's no truly neutral news platform at all. The closest you're going to get to truly neutral is a hometown newspaper that's struggling to survive because you've allowed wages to become so crappy that the average person can't even afford a newspaper anymore. They can't even afford to eat on their own freaking paycheck, buy a car, buy clothes, or pay for a home. And they're requiring government subsidies for everything because of the decisions that you have made. The least you could do is go to your local newspapers every time that there's some kind of issue coming up. So 4 times a year, quarterly, come in once a quarter. You have a single newspaper delivered to every household in the county or in the state. You do it through, and admittedly, a lot of people aren't going to like this idea, but when you look at what, especially the conservative states, I'm looking at a county here recently that managed to spend $16 million. $16 million to convert an old movie theater into a government building so that if a new movie theater was to try and move in, they have to build their own building. And that's all about property taxes, and I get the business side of that. But the simple fact is you can dump $16 million on a renovation, but 4 times a year you can't dump, $6,000, $7,000 with a $2,000 or $3,000 profit on the local newspaper to have them deliver me a freaking newspaper that tells me everything that's coming up for all the political decisions of this quarter. These are the things that might be on the chopping block in 6 months. I shouldn't have to go digging for that information, especially in today's technologically driven world, where literally you have allowed websites, internet service providers, to dictate what you can and cannot see based on their political view. So I don't care if you're talking about AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile or whoever your cell phone provider is, you have literally given them the authority to hide whatever information they want to hide. And it benefits no one. So even if you go looking, you may not be able to find what it is that you're looking for. Because the American government has given internet service providers the authority to restrict what you can and cannot view through a service that you pay for to be able to view what you want to view. So Disney Plus is a prime example. Everywhere I've ever gone, every person I have ever dealt with that has Disney Plus. Now, I've seen it on AT&T. I've seen it on T-Mobile. I've seen it on Verizon Internet. I have seen this happen. Every service provider that I have experience with has done the same thing. You always wind up with Disney Plus being hung in a buffering cycle, because, and I firmly believe that it is because when you have internet service through AT&T, they don't want you watching Disney Plus unless you pay for AT&T cable service or satellite service or whatever. And as long as you pay for that additional service, they don't restrict your usage of the streaming app. But when you're not paying for a service that you don't even want, they're restricting your ability to use the services that you do pay for, that you do want, because they care more about themselves and more about bottom lines and profits than they do about taking care of the customers that are even keeping them in business in today's world. Right? Now, and I know I'm mentioning like national or global level companies here. There are some very small local companies that are less likely to pick and choose, slow down your internet connection or whatever. Problem is those are very few and far between, and even the ones that do exist today don't exist for long. They're dying at an alarming rate. And why are they dying at such an alarming rate? Well, specifically, it's because the American government has taken to utilizing the concepts of a religious ideology and claiming that they can do whatever they want and that you're required to forgive them. And you're not. And you're not required to forgive the 40% of people who are trying to manipulate everything to look like 90% of the vote is in one direction when you only have 40% of the people represented. So at most, 90% of 40 gives you 36% of the total vote. So you're still literally missing 60% of the vote. And when you start talking about concepts such as religious ideology, if the only votes you're receiving are being received through the opinions of the church, which is what's been happening in America for the last 100+ years, because they're hiding the information about the vote. They don't want people to know when and where to go have their voice heard. And then the few people who do try to reach out to their local representatives wind up being ignored because the statistics referencing the opinion of the silent majority are completely skewed by 40% of the population. It's not even a majority of the population. And the reality that we are facing is that the government has been manipulated into believing that they're doing what the people want, because the people can't even access the information that tells them when and where to have their voices heard. And even those who can access that information aren't guaranteed to be able to take time off work to go have their voice heard. You can say it's illegal and whatever, blah, blah, blah. In certain states, it doesn't matter. In certain states, you can look at your boss, and your boss can literally wake up one morning, and they wake up constipated, and they come into work, and they fire you because they didn't get to take a dump this morning. And it is a legitimate reason in that state for them to fire you. Has nothing to do with you, your job performance, nothing to do with company finance. They just don't like you, and so they're taking it out on you, and you can be fired for that. And then when you try to use them for a reference, well, obviously, they don't like you, so what's the point in trying to use them for a reference? It's pretty pointless, right? When your entire life revolves around whether or not you have an income, a lot of the choices that you're supposed to be able to make in your life are no longer choices. And so if you have to choose between keeping your job and going to vote, are you going to try and go vote? Well, there's a whole court system that exists for taking care of these problems between people, and it goes from one person to the next. Some people are just absolutely terrified that they're not going to be able to find another job or whatever. But the reality is even if you lose your job, it might take 2 years or 3 years before you get into court. 2 or 3 years down the road, you can be compensated for everything you've lost because of the decisions of other people who know that they are violating your rights and they just don't care. And of course, they'll deny it, but it pretty much speaks for itself. It is what it is. It's the beauty of being an American. It's one of the things that Donald Trump hates so much about America is that he's not a king, and he never will be a king. He's not a tyrant, and he never will be a tyrant. And you can believe whatever, brainwashed bullcrap your parents and whoever put into your head. You can believe your own one-sided perspective of your microscopic life and the way things worked for you and how everything worked for you. And the reality is that until you can admit, which most people never will admit even when they realize, that just because it worked for you doesn't mean it works for everyone the same way, nothing's going to change. You have yourself convinced that the worst possible outcome is what's best for you. And it's not even what's best for you. You really think that 40% of the population deserves to be dictating the entirety of the nation? No. Not at all. Not in the least. Do I think that the government's responsibility right now, and I know they're talking about breaking up Google, and I'm not getting into that because I can point out quite a few companies historically, especially in the age of technology, that have been far more damaging economically and societally than any benefit they could have ever represented. But I'm not getting into my personal opinions on something like Google or whatever. The problem is that these corporations are being represented as though they are individuals, and they are not at all individuals. They're corporations, they're businesses. Businesses care about what? They care about profit. You know, you start looking at wealth gap, looking at actual history. America has become a monopoly that is basically dictated by the decisions of 4 or 5 massive umbrella corporations that own everything. Everything is monopolized. There is no true capitalism because the people that do have ideas can't afford to apply, reality to their ideas. They can't afford to produce enough product to keep up with the demand, that even if they could produce a working prototype or whatever, demand is going to outpace their ability to supply, and they know it, so they don't even try. Because why should I be taking, $250,000 from somebody who expects $10 billion in return, and then they're going to take my business and they're going to run it the way they want to run it, and they're going to cut me out. As soon as I get my business up and running and on its feet, they're going to sweep in, they're going to do whatever they can to destroy it or purchase it. Now, selling off a startup, okay, that's not necessarily a bad idea. But when you're being financed by, a group of sharks, and they come in and they tell you got to do things because you borrowed their money, you got to do things the way they want them done, and you say, okay, and you don't really understand. You think they know what's best because they got all this money. You think that they got some skin in the game, so they're worried. They got $250,000 sitting in a business that you've invested $3 million into, and if they can run you out of business through your own influencing your own decisions and sell everything that you have for $2 million, they can send some lackey over to cut you some check for half of the value of your business as they're crushing it and causing it to fail. That's not what a free market capitalist society is. Free market is when the consumer controls and decides what exists and what doesn't exist. And modern America is not a free market at all. It is an oppressed market that is run by a very small number of people. And if you manage to break out from under their control, they will still do everything within their power to shut you down, buy you out, or absolutely just crush you. It's not a free market. And it's all because the politicians benefit financially from making the decisions that they make. And they hide behind a religious ideology that they don't even truly believe in, but they claim because it gives 40% of the people, which is represent like 80% or more of the vote, because nobody has access to the information, because the government won't give people access to the information. No American citizen should ever be required to go digging and looking for information that they cannot find when it comes to what's on the next ballot. When is the next ballot? Doesn't matter if it's a county level or if it's all the way up to a federal election. City council, doesn't matter. You should not have to go looking for that information. That information should come to you. And if the government actually cared about the reality of what is America, the government would be going and they would be taking a few of these stockpiled tax dollars, because there's very, very few governments that are broke. Oh, they act like they're broke. They want to raise taxes because they got to give somebody a raise. And the reality is they're sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars that they've got invested in the market or whatever, that they've got all this excessive tax money sitting around somewhere that they're not spending. Oh, it's written up somewhere as a receipt that looks like it's been spent, because if it doesn't look like it's been spent, then, eventually somebody's going to find the truth, right? So they got to make it look like they're spending the money, or that the money is being properly cared for, because money is such a precious commodity that is so hard to come by for the government, but yet you can dump $16 million into developing a movie theater into a government building, but you can't even replace the wooden church pews in the courtroom with reasonably accommodating seating for the average person, not just someone dealing with disabilities. The average person has a right to a comfortable seat in a courtroom. All right, people don't get this. They think that they're being told the truth by the government, that, oh, well, we got to raise all these taxes and everything else. Well, let's see. If you go to a supplier inside your county and you make a purchase from a supplier inside your county of new seating for your courthouse, and you go on ahead and you pay the taxes, because everybody pays taxes, so you don't leave the taxes on the business to pay, you pay those taxes. 7% of the cost is already going right back into the company coffer. And as long as those products are locally built, all right, say they're locally manufactured, shipped straight from the manufacturer to the local outlet, and that you buy them directly from the local outlet, or even if you buy them directly from the manufacturer to cut out a step in some of the expense, right, you're still putting 7% directly back in. But if that supplier or that manufacturer that you're purchasing from is buying his materials locally, 14% of the cost has automatically covered itself. Now, both of those companies are paying, we'll say realistically, paying about 10% in taxes on, labor or whatever on the money that has changed hands. So there's another 20%. Already you have recollected 34% of your money. So your actual expense at this point is only 66% of the total cost. That money literally turns around and comes right back to the government because it's already taxed in. Now you figure everybody that goes and spends that money in the county, that's another 7%. So that's another 14%. So we go from 34%, now we're up to 48%. So literally, when a local government makes purchases from local companies, the money that exchanges hands is literally 50%. The government is literally only spending 50% because the other 50 comes right back to them. How do y'all not see this? Why are governments not focusing, especially these local governments, why are they not focusing more on helping these small businesses and purchasing from their own people who are paying the taxes for their counties? Because then, county, state, it don't matter. That money literally goes right back to the government. The government, okay, yeah, so you've spent 50% of $1 million. So you spent $500,000. I get $500,000 is a lot of money that you still have to recuperate. But that 500, you spend $1 million, you put $1 million in circulation in your county, and it starts moving around. And every time that money changes hands, you get a percentage of it in taxes. That $1 million circulating around your county in the right hands, literally pays for itself. In the wrong hands, it won't, because the wrong hands are going to remove it from circulation, and they're going to go hand it over to BlackRock. Or they're going to go hand it over to, Warren Buffett or whatever. And I'm not saying that Warren Buffett's a bad guy. And don't get me wrong. I'm not saying BlackRock is a bad thing. But if that money gets put in the right place where it starts swirling around your local people, then you literally recollect that money and the taxes off that money changing hands within your own people. I don't get... Governments require money. They have to have an income, period, end of story. The American government does not create money, because it does not create money, it requires money. All right? There are intelligent ways of creating streams of revenue when it comes down to things like taxes, where you don't have to raise taxes to get more money. You have to spend money to get more money. You have to spend it wisely. You can't spend it stupidly. You have to spend it wisely. And it is what it is. You can't hand the money to the local church. And money to local church doesn't pay taxes. Right? Now, if 10% of the money that you hand out gets given to a local church, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because again, that money goes somewhere, it does something, and it gets taxed. Right? But local government can't just give money to a church. That's not a self-sustaining cycle. But if you're using tax dollars, and literally by the time the people that you buy product from pay their employees, and their employees go and spend their paycheck, you've recovered, even realistically, if you only recover 30%, 2 weeks later, you've already recovered 30%. 2 weeks after that, if you have that additional 30%, you're up to 60%. 2 weeks after that, you're at 90%. 2 weeks after that, you have recovered 20% more than you spent in 6 weeks. Just because you injected some cash flow into your local economy in an intelligent fashion. I shouldn't have to tell the government that this really needs to be done. Imagine what would happen if at a national level, local and state governments all of a sudden started going and quarterly purchasing one single newspaper for every person in the county. Just to give you an idea of not even every person, but every household, every voting household in the county. Give you an idea of what's coming up on the political agenda for the next 3 months, next 6 months, next year, right? All of a sudden, your local newspaper isn't stressing about whether or not they're even going to keep their doors open till next year, right? Maybe they're worried about what's going to happen in 3 months. But if you give them just enough money through these 4 purchases a year to keep their doors open, just to keep their doors open, you're not cutting out competitors, because somebody out there might be willing to produce these newspapers for the government at a lower cost or whatever. I mean, I'm not saying that it has to be, but what I'm saying is if the government doesn't step up and do something, they haven't done enough for the people to be able to support the newspaper. So the newspapers are dying because people don't have the money to buy a newspaper, so they turn to the internet, and they can't even afford to have online subscriptions, right? But where does paper come from? There's a whole nother series of jobs that are created by newspaper outlets. Paper comes from loggers and paper mills. The effect of spending that money and bolstering the economy to give the people the information that they are entitled. The American people have the right to expect political information to be freely set at their doorstep. Now, I understand there's no such thing as a free lunch. It all comes around in a form of taxation. But the benefits that you receive from exchanging a little bit of money and circulating a little bit of money in the right hands in your town, literally 100 years from now, you have no idea the difference that it could make in that town. I mean, heaven forbid your grandchildren wind up stuck in the same town that you're in doing the same job that you're doing, all because you were too worried about $10 a year. I mean, 100,000 people spending $10 a year, that's $1 million right there. $1 million should be more than enough to produce 4 newspapers per year per household. I mean, when you break it down to the reality of what your actual cost of something like this is in taxes, it's not that big. It wouldn't cost $500,000. There's no way it'd cost $500,000 to give a single newspaper to every household in your county. Even if you do it 4 times a year, you might get up to around $500,000 in actual cost if you're allowing your newspaper outlet a small percentage of profit that helps them not shutter their doors like so many other small newspaper outlets have. Right? I mean, it is what it is. But, people don't want to look at reality. They want to look at their own pocket. They want to look at their own life. They want to look at their own belief and their own opinion through a microscope and act like that's the only way things can be. It's not the only way things can be, and it's not the way things are supposed to be. It's just the way that you want them to be. So you're trying to force them to be what you want, and you don't have that right. It's not what America ever was intended to be.